One of the most dangerous and overlooked gang conflicts in Minneapolis history involved the 10s and 20s gangs versus the Rolling 30s Bloods. What makes this story even more unsettling is that some people in the Twin Cities still don't know it ever happened. This wasn't just a neighborhood rivalry or a few isolated incidents. The conflict stretched across South Minneapolis and followed people beyond the block, into places where violence was never expected. Welcome to MN Crime Tales, where we cover the most shocking, mysterious, and jaw-dropping crime stories from Minnesota. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and you already know to like, comment, and share this video. Now let's get right into it. To understand how dangerous this beef became, we first need you to understand the distance, and how little of space separated both sides. The 10s and 20s gangs held their ground around Franklin Avenue and Chicago and its direct surrounding blocks in South Minneapolis. They also had a stronghold around some blocks close to Hiawatha and I-35W. Meanwhile, just 1 mile south, the Rolling 30s Bloods controlled Chicago Avenue between Lake Street and 39th. That short 1 mile distance mattered in this war. Along Chicago Avenue, lines blurred. Crossing into the ops territory didn't take much effort, and once it happened, things could often turn dangerous on sight. The Bloods had been rooted in the South Side for decades and had even been hit with strong federal cases years before this part of their story came about. The 10s and 20s gang hadn't been around as long as the Rolling 30s Bloods. However, their control of the drug trafficking and gang territory around the Peavy Park area was undeniable, and their beef with the Bloods was extremely dangerous, and both sides were eager to catch the other off guard to prove a point. There had already been bloodshed between the groups, but in 2014 it went to levels that no one in the city ever predicted. Percy Lacey Jr, aka P3, was one of the most active members of the 10s and 20s at the time, and the war was heating up even more on the South Side with his ops from the Rolling 30s. Then on August 19, 2014, in the Rolling 30s Blood territory, near 37th Street and Chicago Avenue, a victim with initials DL was walking westbound with 2 other men when a Chevy Tahoe slowed down as it approached. Without warning, gunfire erupted from the vehicle. Multiple shots were fired into the group before the SUV sped away. Percy Lacey has shot multiple times from the Tahoe at DL, who investigators say was connected to the Rolling 30s Bloods. Court records state that one of the rounds fired by Percy Lacey struck DL in the leg. The damage was severe. The bullet shattered bone, leaving surgeons no choice but to insert a metal rod to stabilize the injury. At this time now you could feel the thickness of danger in the air in South Minneapolis. This would carry on into another shooting that same month in the war. Because just 2 days later, on August 21, 2014, a member of the 10s gang opened fire on a Rolling 30s Bloods member during a shooting at the McDonald's on 2nd and Lake Street in South Minneapolis. A young child was in the car that was being shot at. Luckily, no one was hurt in the shooting. Then on August 28, 2014, a couple members of the Rolling 30s Bloods were walking around the area of 38th and Oakland in their territory when a man in a red SUV pulled up and yelled, "What up, Blood?" to the men. The man then reached across, firing multiple shots out of the passenger window. The man that fired the shots at the men was later identified as Vishon Johnson, a member of the 10s and 20s gangs, and someone who will play a major role on how this story played out later down the line. The criminal complaint states the 2 rival individuals were both hit during the shooting. One suffered a gunshot wound to the hand, while the other was struck in the lower back and transported to the hospital for treatment. At this time, the Rolling 30s Bloods were hungry for revenge and were willing to do anything to catch a member of the 10s and 20s gangs. And they would soon have their chance. The same day of the shooting we just mentioned, Percy Lacey aka P3 had court that day, downtown Minneapolis, inside of the Hennepin County Government Center. Somehow the Rolling 30s Bloods got a hold of that information and made their way over to the Government Center downtown, where their op, P3, would soon be having court. In this surveillance video, you can see multiple members of the Rolling 30s making their way into the Government Center. Then they were checking the display screen to see where exactly their op, P3, would be having his court hearing inside of the building. Then as the video continues, you can see they eventually run into P3, and he takes off running out of the Government Center. The Bloods tried to catch P3 but were not able to as he was running fast like Sonic the Hedgehog for coins. It was clear this was a close call for him, and his ego was clearly shaken after being ran out of the government center in embarrassing fashion. That same day, not long after he was chased out of the Hennepin County Government Center by the Rolling 30s Bloods, P3 and other members of the 10s and 20s got word that the Rolling 30s Bloods would be at HCMC Hospital in downtown Minneapolis visiting one of their injured members that was shot by the 10s and 20s earlier in the day. Armed with this information, the 10s and 20s gang members were set out for revenge and planned an attack so brazen it shook city officials within the Hennepin County Attorney's Office to the core. Because at approximately 3 p.m. that day, Percy Lacey and Vishon Johnson had pulled up to the hospital, along with other members of the 10s and 20s gangs, and a Ford escaped close to the emergency room entrance after members of the Rolling 30s Bloods arrived to visit their wounded member. The court documents then say members of the 10s and 20s gangs had lured members of the Rolling 30s Bloods to the outside of the emergency room at the hospital. Witnesses that were Rolling 30s Blood members told the police Lacey had yelled out to the Bloods, "Let's shoot it out." The witness went on to tell the police that once he had hit Johnson, he then heard Johnson yell out, "Air him out, cuz." It is at this time P3 decided to let off around 23 shots from a 9mm semi-automatic pistol with an extended magazine. Those shots were fired in the direction of the HCMC emergency room entrance. When officers arrived, they saw severe damage to the windows of the emergency room from the gunfire and found multiple gun shells and fragment casings near 8th and Chicago Avenue. Another witness on the scene said she heard shots and jumped behind her parked car while she waited for the shooting to stop. She then went to go check on her boyfriend and child that were in a nearby parked vehicle. She ended up finding a bullet hole in her rear door and another bullet hole in the back of the vehicle directly behind where her children were seated. The scene was chaotic and was like something straight out of a movie scene. There were gang members, medical staff, security, patients, and other bystanders trying to avoid being hit with the hail of bullets. Despite this chaos and extreme lack of respect for human life, luckily no one was hurt in the shooting. Despite some Rolling 30s Bloods being arrested for their roles leading up to the hospital shooting, it was clear there were bigger charges coming to the 10s and 20s for the shooting. In the next month, on September 24, 2014, Vishon Johnson was shot at the Moto Mart in South Minneapolis, which was a known hangout for members of the 10s and 20s at the time. Vishon was lucky though, as he was able to avoid death, but was paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair after the shooting. Other members of the 10s and 20s were shot in this incident, but they all survived their injuries. No one was ever charged in that shooting. But that was the least of his troubles, because him and P3 would be taken into state custody and facing all types of charges in relation to the multiple shootings they were involved with in relation to the Rolling 30s Bloods. But while they were in state custody, the feds announced in August of 2015, nearly a year after the incidents, that they would be adding their own charges on top of what the state had already charged them with. Vishon would be the first to make a plea agreement, and in his plea agreement he agreed that he would fully cooperate with authorities in his case as well as other cases against the 10s and 20s gangs. Something it also said in his own writing was he would also help with the federal case as part of the deal. This is more than likely the reason why he didn't catch federal charges despite him literally being a trigger puller in the war. Vishon was originally charged with 4 counts of attempted murder for the benefit of a gang. He was eventually sentenced to 220-month sentence, which is 18 years in prison. But that was given a downward departure for his cooperation with law enforcement. And with that, 2 of the attempted murder charges were dropped, and he was sent to the Hennepin County Workhouse for a little under a year, along with 10 years of supervised release. Pretty light sentence for his role in the beef. But Vishon's plea and cooperation affected how P3 would move forward with his case, as he was facing serious charges and decades in prison. P3 was facing multiple charges of assault with a deadly weapon attached to the benefit of gang and other charges on the state level. He was also facing drug and gun charges in his federal case on top of that. And let it be known that there were multiple members included in the federal indictment of 10s and 20s members, including the man that had shot at a Rolling 30s Blood member at the McDonald's on 2nd and Lake Street earlier in this story. Facing decades in prison, Lacey chose to take plea deals in both state and federal court rather than roll the dice at trial. In Hennepin County, those pleas closed out multiple state cases tied to violent crimes from 2014. One case ended with a conviction for second-degree murder with intent, not premeditated. Another ended with a conviction for second-degree assault with a dangerous weapon causing substantial bodily harm. As part of those deals, multiple other felony charges were dropped, including additional assault counts and firearm cases. The rest got folded into the sentencing instead of stacking new convictions. On September 19, 2016, Lacey was sent to the Minnesota Department of Corrections. The cases were structured to run together, with the 225-month sentence as the main piece. The shorter 39-month sentence got absorbed into the time. He was credited with 736 days already served. But here's the part some people missed: he never touched a federal prison. That Fed time was ordered to run concurrent with the state case, so he is serving his time inside Minnesota DOC, not the feds. Hopefully the story of Percy Lacey aka P3 can help someone currently in the gang life realize the streets aren't worth your freedom. Now make sure you smash that subscribe button, and you already know to like, share, and comment your thoughts on this episode. Episode 5 is on the way.